1632 by Eric Flint, book review. So 1632 is yet another time travel story where a modern day Americans travel back in time to medieval Europe, 1632 to be exact. But what makes this story different than all the other time travel stories out there is that this time it's a whole town that gets transported back in time. Not just the people, but the buildings, the streets, the cars, everything, just everything in this small American town just gets magically transported back in time and across continents into the middle of medieval Germany in 1632. So this whole town is just plunked right down in the middle of Germany in 1632. Now, obviously, we're in the realm of fantasy here, and it's completely unbelievable, but it's the kind of thing that you either have to just accept or find another book to read. The author makes very little attempt to kind of justify what happens. There's a brief one-paragraph description at the beginning that tells how it was like a form of alien art that somehow ruptured the space-time continuum, causing the entire fictional town of Grantville, West Virginia, to be transported to central Germany during the 30 Years' War. And he doesn't really describe it any more than that. And I guess you're just kind of on board with the premise or you're not. Somehow, this whole town ends up in Germany in 1632. Now, once you grant him that premise, then everything from then, it kind of is logical within the world. Like, there's no more kind of magic after that. But you do have to kind of grant that kind of amazing premise at the beginning. Now, time travel books are their own kind of genre, but this is the only book I know of where you take an entire town, the people, the buildings, the land, everything, and transport it whole into Germany, into the medieval times. And, if you're the kind of person who likes to have a cup of coffee and kind of ponder these things, it presents some interesting questions if you like to play the what-if game. So, what if a whole American town was transported into Germany during the middle of the 30 Years' War? Would they end up learning German? Or would all of the Germans begin speaking English? Would they be able to spread kind of the modern ideas of enlightenment? Or would they kind of be overwhelmed by the native population? Now, they also have all their technology with them. They have their cars and their guns. So would they be able to use this technology to completely dominate the native population? Or would, the numbers of the native population overwhelm them? And of course, the machinery breaks down eventually, right? I mean, what happens in 5 or 10 years when these cars start to break down? How long could they maintain their technological advantage? So this is the kind of mind game that you can play with this kind of book, and it kind of plays out, of course, in the fiction. What exactly would happen if the whole town was transported? And there's also a lot of historical detail mixed into this book. The author, Eric Flint, if you look at his Wikipedia bio, he's an interesting guy. He's done his research in history, and yeah, it's very well researched. It's light reading as these things go, but you do have to wade through a lot of stuff, the history stuff about the conflicts during this time period. Excuse me. Now, this takes place during the 30 Years' War, which is kind of a complicated, confusing war. And there's a lot of stuff about King Gustavus Adolphus and his generals and the political situation in Europe. I enjoy this stuff because I'm a history geek, although I did feel sometimes that these info dumps were kind of breaking the forward momentum of the story. On the other hand, the whole reason I read historical fiction is to kind of learn all these interesting details. And you never know when they might come up. In fact, while I was reading this at the family dinner table, somebody was talking about Gustavus Adolphus College. There's a college in Minnesota named after Gustavus Adolphus. I never knew that. And I was able to, say, yeah, I've just been reading about him, and explain kind of the historical significance about who Gustavus Adolphus was. Now, the 30 Years' War was not a high point of human history. Eric Flint portrays it as a time of religious wars, mercenary armies, raping and pillaging, and tyranny. So when you have this small American town transported back in time, they are shocked by what is going on. Now, I think what you could do is you could set this up as a conflict between kind of modern enlightened values and kind of medieval values, and put this as a conflict between two different times. Interestingly enough, though, Eric Flint chooses to emphasize the conflict between American and European values. You keep hearing about American values over and over again. I'm not sure if this book, 1632, has been translated into German yet, but I can't imagine it would be so popular in Europe with its kind of emphasis on kind of American values. It's interesting. Now, if you look Eric Flint up online, he's not a conservative guy. He's been a labor activist, a political activist, like a socialist his whole life. So he's not a closed-minded guy. But I did find this mildly irritating. I think you have this idea in America that we had our political revolution in 1776 and we became free, and the rest of the world is still frozen in time in this medieval kind of monarchs and kings and lords and castles view and stuff like that. Whereas in reality, I think most of Europe has kind of modernized with America. So it's not like a clash between American and European values. It's a clash between modern and medieval values. I don't know why he frames it as kind of like American values. I don't know. But again, Eric Flint is not a conservative. He has kind of come through the Labor Party struggles. Sorry, not Labor Party. He's been a labor activist. So there's a very sympathetic portrayal of union activists in this book. In this book, it's kind of a mining town, so they're dominated by union people. Also, he does, to his credit, he does bring up the Dutch republics, which preceded the American Revolution, which actually was news to me at the time I read this book. I had kind of thought that the American Revolution was the first republic in the modern era, not counting Rome and Greece and stuff like that. But yeah, from this book, I learned that, they did have the Dutch republics, which preceded the American republics. There's a lot of battle scenes in this book. And the American have all their modern guns, and so they're able to just dominate the battle, just kind of shoot down all the medieval forces that come to fight them. Now this is interesting because I was reading this book and I thought to myself, why wouldn't it be more interesting to have the bad guys have all the weapons, right? Like, why is it interesting to give the good guys overwhelmingly technological superiority and then just kind of dominate everything? Where's the suspense in that? Wouldn't it be more interesting if, like, these horrible people travel back in time with technological superiority, and then, it was a real struggle? Just put the technology in the hands of the bad guys, not the good guys. And that would make a more interesting story because it's more of an uphill struggle. I don't know. And yet, I do have to admit that reading this book was kind of interesting. And I'm not sure it's interesting in a good way. I don't know. I'm getting into kind of Darwinism here or something like that, but I think there's something kind of in the mind of the reader, you know, this Rambo Syndrome, where you're kind of living vicariously through the characters and imagining yourself kind of mowing down all of your enemies, and this kind of feeling of dominance that you get by, or fascination with the utter superiority over your enemies. I also wonder, there's something about Freud's theory about the phallic appeal of guns, or maybe, I think there's this an American ideal, it's not always stated, but maybe it's in the back of our minds, that the good guys always have superior firepower. There seems to be something in the back of the American psyche. You think of the good guys as always having the most guns, and maybe that's kind of coming through in this book. But it's not all about the battle scenes. Besides the battle, there's also kind of the new society being formed. So the German refugees from the 30 Years' War are coming into the city of Grantville, and there's a new society where they're kind of teaching freedom and equality to these medieval people. So yeah, there's some interesting stuff going on there. The book presents an idealistic portrait of American values and the common American man. German refugees are welcomed into Grantville. They're fed, they're clothed, they're given equal voting rights. Now, Eric Flint, actually, there's an author's afterword in this book, and he defends his idealism. He said, where he says, you know, this is what America's all about. Given the current rhetoric on immigration going on nowadays, I'm a bit more skeptical about the American willingness to welcome outsiders. But this book was published in 2000. So I don't know, maybe it would read differently nowadays if Eric Flint wrote it nowadays. The book is actually part of a whole series. So this is the first book in kind of a long series that kind of follows this what if, what would happen, and kind of follows it out and out and out in further books, which I'm not sure I'm going to keep reading or not. It's mildly interesting, but there are just way too many other books on my list right now. Still, if you're a history geek, I give this a recommendation.